That pop culture reference should have gone over better. All right, we get a heart there, so that's good. I like that. All right, so it is noon, so we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. I'm so glad that you're here today. We have a professional development series. Many of you are aware of this, but I'll make that announcement every time because I never know if someone's here for the first time or watching us asynchronously later for the first time. We have a professional development series, noon every Wednesday. We archive the recordings of these so you can watch for later if you can never make it in person. Today, we'll be having a teaching chat. We'll talk about what that is in just a second. Next week, I'm very excited. We have a presentation by Trevor Bell from Psychological Sciences, where they will be presenting something called, So a Marginalized Student Walks into Your Classroom. Now, what has happened is this is going to be talking about inclusive teaching practices. But I really, like I said at the beginning of this, I'm writing a chapter right now, Disparagement is Subversive Humor. So I'm in the humor mindset right now. So I really appreciate that kind of humorous take on the title. We can be playful sometimes because we're all with friends. Today, we're going to be having a teaching chat. A teaching chat is when we don't have a formal presentation, but we have the opportunity to kind of talk about some things that are in my mind, on your minds. We can process problems, crowdsource solutions, all of those kinds of things. I think these are fun. It's almost like TLC office hours, except that I get to unload a lot on you of a lot of the things that I'm dealing with and that I want to hear your feedback on. If you're in a position where, you know what, I just want to sit back and listen, that's completely, totally fine. If you want to be part of the conversation more actively, I'll be monitoring the chat. Also, you can always unmute and talk. But I'm so glad that you're here. I want to begin with the pandemic nicknames. This is something that if you've been here before, you may have done with us before. Pandemic nicknames is a situation where you're going to drop in the chat, but you're not going to hit enter until I tell you, because we're going to waterfall chat this thing. Your first name is the emotion you're predominantly feeling. Second name is the last thing you ate, or as I see some of you, might be what you're currently eating. That is completely, totally fine. So I'm going to give you a couple seconds to write that into the chat, but don't hit enter until I say go. And Noah is amazing about dropping things into the chat. He's also going to drop, while we're doing this little game, he's going to drop into the chat how you can earn a professional development certificate. There it is, how you can earn a professional development certificate for coming to these events. All right, let's hit enter. All right, so I had excited peanut butter cup. We have exhausted bagel. We have exhausted tomato soup. We have tired pasta. We have tired trail mix. Now, one of the things, you don't have to be a data scientist to realize that there is a pretty clear content analysis conclusion coming out of these so far. We've got determined cracker, dealing Qdoba, exhausted sag paneer, hungry Esther, frustrated apple, tired apple, scared and chicken and noodles, tired teriyaki chicken, and hungry pork. All right, so we are tired. This is not surprising, right? We're kind of 7-8 weeks into the semester right now. It's amazing. I'm starting to, with the planning, we're starting to think of things that we can fit in before the end of the semester versus things that are going to roll over to the spring. For instance, with degree progress, 9 weeks in, oh my goodness. Yeah, so we're kind of thinking toward that, but who's counting? And many of us are just checking them off on the syllabus as we go. But we're tired. And I think one of the things, you've heard me talk about peace before, right? And I think that good instructors, excellent instructors, we're going to bring preparation, expertise, authenticity, caring, and engagement to every class. And I think sometimes that authenticity, we might come in and say, hey, y'all, I'm tired too. I remember I said this to one of my classes once, and they said, I never thought that teachers and instructors and professors got tired. Of course we do, right? We don't have limitless energy. We're not batteries that just get plugged in. We're people with real challenges and real emotions and things like that. So I think sometimes, when I ask students how they're doing and I get the ambiguous nod, I'll tell them, hey, I'm getting the ambiguous nod. I know exactly what that means because it's October. We all have that kind of moment to kind of, recollect. And then we try to have the best class that we can have. And one of the things that I wanted to get a bounce off of you is that I did a guest lecture recently. I like to cancel my adulting subscription, right? Yeah, it's not a good renewal. And so if you've got that on automatic debit, you get to switch that completely. The adulting subscription is not great. But I gave a guest lecture in someone else's class recently. And when you give a guest lecture, there's a couple things that are different from normal teaching, right? You don't know the people, they don't know you, you don't have that rapport built up, you haven't built a community. So it's typically going to be, maybe a little bit more, kind of a cold prep than kind of something that is a little bit easier for you to kind of walk into your normal surroundings, your normal people. So I went in to give this guest lecture, and it was in a teaching class in one of the departments on campus. And they have all of their people, all their graduate students teach. So they wanted all of their people to take this mandatory class in their first semester about teaching. So they invited me to have one of their class sessions. The class did not go great. It was really kind of an interesting experience. I tend to have pretty good experiences in the class. I tend to try to bring the engagement. My students tend to reflect the engagement. We learn a lot together, very interactive. And this cohort of students, relatively small class, 8 to 10 students, was giving me nothing. They were not reflecting my engagement. They were not answering my questions. They were not asking their own questions. And in 50 minutes, and I felt like I was kind of bringing it, and I was saying wonderful things and giving them awesome lessons for them to teach in the future, not a single person wrote down a single thing that I said. And I even used, some of the cues that I'll do is sometimes be like, P stands for yada, yada. Let me say that again. And then I say it again. And usually people kind of cued in, oh, maybe I should retain that for a later time period. No one wrote down a single thing that I had said. And about halfway through the class, it actually occurred to me, like, maybe you just bowl. Maybe you just be like, all right, this isn't working today. See you next time, even though I'm a guest lecturer, and there'll be no next time. So what I wanted to do, and this is actually the topic of one of the videos we're going to put out soon, is what do you do when you're just off that day? What do you do when the class is just not resonating with you? What do you do when you're just not getting the feedback from them? It's not dynamic. What do you do in those situations? Because me walking out of class isn't going to happen, right? Because then the story becomes that I walked out of class, not that we had a disengaging day that we're trying to rectify. So I'm not walking out. What do we do when we stay? And again, you can drop your ideas in the chat. You can say them out loud, but I have my ideas. I can tell you what I did in a little bit, but I'm just kind of curious, like, what do we do in those situations? Because I'm sure I'm not the only one who's had an off day in class. Andy.
So yes, I've definitely had off days, and I feel like recently I've had more off days that I'm accustomed to. It's just, I feel like everybody's kind of tired. One thing I do have to say is that, so like I'll check in with my students regularly about how they're doing, how they're perceiving class. And sometimes I'm kind of surprised. I feel like I have a class this semester that they feel kind of low energy. I can't get them as engaged as I usually can. And I've kind of been like, what do I do with this class? And then when they report back to me, they're like, oh yeah, like I really like this. I really like, sometimes I feel like the student's perception of their engagement is different than my perception of their engagement. Like we did an activity the other day that I thought was going to be fun. And then it went okay. It was to get them started with class. We did wrong answers only. So it's a Spanish class. So it's in Spanish. I'm having them just like give answers out. So I'd be like, what is the moon made out of? Wrong answers only. One student said cheese and a couple other students said, no, wrong answers only, which I just loved. But I felt like the activity just like, it didn't have quite the spark that I was expecting it to. But then afterwards, I was talking to a student and he said, that was great. That activity was wonderful. Like we were talking with each other in Spanish, in the groups. And so like, I was like, okay, maybe like their perception is different than my perception and that they're actually getting a lot more out of this than what I am. So that's one thing that I keep in mind. The other one is just like, sometimes I'll actually hit a pause button in class and be like, what's going on? Like, you guys seem low energy. Like, is the material hard? Are you tired? Do we need to take a stretch break? Like, I think that those can be helpful things to just kind of pause. And sometimes that's enough to have them be like, oh, are we not engaging like we're supposed to be? Okay, like maybe we will. And sometimes they're just like, yeah, we're not feeling it today. So then you can kind of brainstorm or figure out ways to move forward. But those are some of my thoughts. And I'd like to hear other thoughts too.
So I do want to say that I love the idea of saying that, you know, we're drawing an inference in front of the classroom, but we don't really know what's going on. We don't know what's going on in those students' heads. And I love your idea of kind of saying, you know, sometimes just like, hey, what's up? You know, kind of acknowledging the awkwardness in the room. So love those thoughts. Thank you, Andy. What do the rest of y'all think?
So I have had very similar experiences as Andy just shared. But one of the classes that I teach it, you know, multiple times on different days and at different times. And one of the things I have found is inevitably the class that I have that occurs on Tuesday, Thursday afternoons always feels lower energy, less engagement than my classes on Mondays and Wednesday mornings. And I've struggled with that because I've just always felt like they were just kind of, you know, like I'm doing, it's the same content. Like, I tend to compare them to the, you know, the Monday class or the Wednesday class, you know, and think, well, they were so much more engaged and they were doing this. But then when I ask questions or when I have them turn and talk, their conversations are just as rich and sometimes even richer than those that were had in those other classes. So sometimes it's just maybe thinking about the fact that, like, when I see them at 2:45 in the afternoon, they've already had like how many other classes, you know, they've already done how much of this other stuff throughout the day versus the students that I see at the very beginning of the morning who this is, you know, I'm getting them fresh, so to speak. I mean, they're tired, you know, so it's a little bit different perspective, and I have to think about what their day has done to them. I tend to also try to start each class with some kind of a non-content SEL type opener or question, you know, like you mentioned, wrong answers only. So I often will do those memes that say on a scale of, you know, like, Ross, how are you feeling today? You know, and there's all these different images of Ross from Friends, or on a scale of, you know, owls, and there's all these different pictures of owls, right? And so then they share with their tables, and then as they're sharing, I'm walking around, I'm like, I'm listening to myself. I hope nobody says number 9, you know, like, or if they say this, then I need to be aware. And so it just kind of gives me that gauge as well, as we're going in. And then they're also recognizing, you know, like, this is how I'm feeling. I may need to adjust what I'm doing when we get started for classes. But sometimes it's also just pausing, like Andy said, and just like, hey, you know what? Why don't you just process what we've just been talking about with your table groups? And that just kind of breaks it up a little bit. And then I can tell if, like, are they catching on to what I want them to say? And like you, my afternoon classes take far fewer notes than my morning classes. And I use a student notebook, a guided notebook kind of a thing anyway. So like they have, like, they know it's kind of an outline for them, you know, so they kind of know what I'm expecting, but they take far fewer notes. So I don't know if that helps, but yeah, I feel you.
And Beth, one of the things that I want to kind of amplify too, the point you made about the cohorts might be different. Because there are times when I'll do the exact same thing in one class, even semester to semester. So it's not even a time difference in the same semester, but an activity that went really, really well, or a conversation that was really, really vibrant, just bombs the next time. And I think it's that kind of lack of complete predictability or control that makes teaching exciting, right? And what I try to do in these situations is kind of say, you know, what's the challenge? What's the puzzle? What's the key here that I can do to kind of unlock their engagement for the day? And if one thing's not working, I'm gonna shift gears and try something else. And I really appreciate when I hear excellent teachers like you and Andy saying, this has happened to me too. It really validates my experience. So thank you so much. What other thoughts do people kind of have on this challenge that we might have where it's just not going right?
I was gonna say, I would love to hear. Sometimes when it's not going well, I realize they might not be prepared for class. And there's nothing we can do in the moment to all of a sudden make them prepared for class. And so it's hard in those moments when I realize, I'm like, the majority of you didn't prepare. Okay, great. Now we can't have the discussion I thought we could have. And sometimes I can shape it to start way back at the basics to get a discussion going. But yeah, to throw out there, what do you do in those moments when you know they're not participating because you can tell they didn't prepare? Where do we go from there? And some days I'm more on my game and I can pull them from, well, what do you think about this? How would that apply? But other days it's harder. And I'm like, I don't know how to lead you in. I don't know how to lead you in if you didn't prepare, besides remind them, you remember we have to prepare for class to have these discussions.
And Natalie, my experience, it's now is when we see that dip, right? Early in the semester, people are still on pretty good behavior. End of the semester, they're motivated to get that grade up.
Yeah.
We're kind of at that sweet spot where they're like, I have so many things going on. Some things are going to slide. And it happens to be prep for your class discussion that slides.
Right.
I've noticed that I've had issues with that too. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. And in cases like that, where like I was asking them to read something or do something specific before class, I give them 5 minutes of alone zone time to refresh their memory. And so they can go in, they can look at the reading, they can look at their submission that they made for me, whatever it may need. I give them maybe some things to think, some prompts or some things that we're going to talk about to kind of focus on as they're doing that. And I set a timer. And so everybody gets 5 minutes of alone zone time. And so they're just whatever they need to refresh their memory or feel a little bit more prepared for that discussion or for that activity or whatever is going to happen.
I love that. I'm completely stealing that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I was going to say that I always have my students, I have preparation guides for every class. And one of the things that since I started implementing that, it has helped hugely with this problem of students not coming prepared to class, because I tell them exactly what the discussion is going to be, what I'm expecting that they get out of the reading. And I'll have them do specific things with the reading that then I can have them use in class. So sometimes it'll be like picking out like 3 citations that you found interesting in the text or that you found confusing, or different, what are the 5 main takeaways that you got from it? Different things like that then they know that that's what they're going to have to do in class. And what I really love about it is that it gives students a shortcut when they don't have the time to fully prepare like they should. They can look over the preparation guide and go, okay, I at least need to figure out X. And so even if they're not fully prepared, they're usually prepared enough that they can follow along with what's going on and participate in the conversation. And so that has helped hugely with not having these students coming to class and being like, I didn't do anything. Like, at least do this.
Cheryl asked in the chat, I'm replying in the chat as well. I'm wondering about part of the issue with the note taking is they don't seem to really be doing it well anymore. And one of the things, I actually made this distinction yesterday in a class I was teaching between note taking and note copying. And I think a lot of times what my students do is they note copy. They copy whatever a slide has. If you've ever taken a class with me and you've ever seen the PowerPoint slides that I use, there's not that much on them. I might put a word, and that word reminds me to teach that concept, but it won't have the definition, won't have the examples, it won't have the nuance necessarily. And that is all, I'll provide that orally, or I might even write on the whiteboard, because sometimes I'm a dinosaur who does that. And what will happen is my students sometimes, after an exam might say, hey, you didn't teach that concept. And I'll be like, what do you mean? And they'll show me their notebook and it will just have the word written. It's like, you never told us anything else. Like, yes, I did. But the problem is I told you, I didn't write it down. And so one of the things that I will often do in my classes where I do have, more lecture style teaching is I'll remind them that not all of the content is on my slides. The slide just helps me organize the conversation I have with you. And that's when I use cues like I had said earlier, let me say that again. Or does anyone need me to say that again? And they say, oh, wait, I need to be recording that. And then that kind of cues them to record it. But I do wonder, it's one of those things like, who should teach them? Is it me in my general psychology class? Is it the high school teachers? I don't know. And as Beth's saying, do I have to write this down? Actually, one of the things I always say, if any student ever asks me, do I need to do something? Do I have to do something? I always say no, But if you want to learn this information, if you want to do well in the exam, then I recommend that you do so. So I try to turn the choice back around on them, because intrinsic motivation is a huge part of my teaching philosophy. So you don't do it for me, do it for you. Do it because you decided to, not because I told you to. So what I ended up doing is I said, you know what, I was in my head, and I'm one of those people, and this is not a great strategy, but I evaluate my performance while performing. So I'm kind of metacognitive in the moment. So rather than thinking about it in the fact and doing it, and it can be distracting, and I've been doing it for a long time, so I've kind of figured out how to do it. But yes, the entire class is optional, as Andy says. It's a great reframe. But I was kind of thinking, this is a class on teaching. These are people who will be teaching, and I'm talking about teaching. So what I need to do is, even if they're not with me, I have to model what I think good teaching looks like. So if they're going to have no other exposure to me, I need them to see me do that so that they'll have some idea about what I'm about and what I model. So everyone want to reach out again, that's fine. I'm also aware that some students aren't going to look engaged, right? They're going to have like that tired, calm looking face, but there might be things kind of spinning behind, in the frontal lobe, all that kind of stuff. They might actually be active. And I was using kind of inspirational thoughts to myself mid-lecture and saying things like, if one piece of what you're saying positively affects one emerging teacher, the impact on the thousands of students that might teach over the course of their career might be really monumental. So I was kind of reminding myself, it doesn't matter if everything lands. It doesn't matter if every student has something land on them. But if I have even a small effect on one person in this class, that might eventually become a large ripple effect. And that's the game I was kind of playing with myself to kind of inspire what I was doing. And when I look over my teaching over the years, one of the things I do at the end of my classes is say, what's the most important thing you learned in this class? Invariably, some of the things on those lists are not the main points that I taught. It was something tangential. It was an offhand comment. It was something I had, said at the beginning of class before class even formally started. So I never know what's going to resonate with my students. So I was just saying, well, if they're not going to engage with me, then I'm going to give them a lot of things that'll eventually resonate. And that's how I kind of went with it. And what I found out after, because the instructor's like, oh, that the person I was guest lecturing for said that went great. And I said, it didn't feel like it went great. And she's like, oh yeah, this class is horrible. And it turns out that the issue is they're forced to take this class. The students don't want to take it. And many of their major professors tell them they shouldn't have to take it. So there's a lot of resistance to taking that class. And it's just, they bring that resistance with them every day. So it was really kind of an odd, hostile situation I was walking into. And I had no idea. I've done a lot of guest lectures, and they're often, very happy to talk about the things I want to talk about. It was just kind of an interesting kind of thing to do. Scott Finkeldye is in on the call, and he actually dropped some stuff in the chat about note-taking and resources to provide for that. So I really appreciate some of the stuff that people are saying. So let's see. Someone just Andrew dropped in, super specific example, but when he mentored undergrads in a research setting during his master's program, he took the time around to teach them how to read scientific articles, which is a heavy part of their task. They told me afterwards they'd never thought about how to read those articles. And that was actually something that I was taught as an undergraduate in one of the seminars that I took, because we were going to be reading a lot of articles. And they said, this is what you should get from the intro. This is what you get from the method. This is what you want to take from the results, particularly if you don't understand all the stats. So there are times when as an undergraduate, you'd be like, this doesn't make any sense to me, I'm going to skip it. They gave us a little bit of guidance for how to approach that, even if we didn't have all of the understanding. Beth wonders about students who are joining via Zoom or not engaging because the camera is off. When they talk to them later, watch the chat, they're engaged. Maybe we need to think about our students who look unengaged as camera off that day. That's a really empathetic way to look at that, Beth. I really appreciate that. And it's funny because when students have their cameras off after I've set up, how my cameras are going to kind of be on. My Zoom policy is, I want your camera on. It's going to help me teach you. You're going to have better opportunities to give me nonverbal and verbal feedback to help me teach you better. I can see misunderstanding. It keeps you engaged, keeps me engaged, increases accountability. Having said that, if there's any day where that camera needs to be off, just let me know, hey, camera's off today. You don't even have to tell me why, and we're completely, totally fine. So it might be, as Beth's kind of saying, they respected you enough to come, but they didn't have enough bandwidth to be completely there. And that's something to kind of take note of. I really appreciate that reminder. Andy says, I tell my students if we're having an off day, they can tell me they'd like to attend as an observer. And especially in a foreign language class where, the expectation might be you're not observing, having that out, I think is a really nice empathetic thing.
Yeah,
And
particularly we have a lot of students who, they get a lot of anxiety from the language classroom. And so I say, if you're feeling really anxious and you're like, I don't know if I can go today, like I'm feeling really anxious and I don't want to go, like, tell me that you're going to be there as an observer, because I'd rather have you in the classroom and hearing and seeing what's going on so that you're not missing out than not being there at all. So I said, you can sit in the back, it's fine. And you're just saying, I'm here as an observer today. I just want to. And a lot of times too, they do that. And like after 15, 20 minutes, they go, oh, okay, yeah, actually I'm feeling okay now to participate. But it gives them kind of an opportunity to be like, I'm not feeling it today. I just want to sit and like not do the group work that we always do in class.
so Andy, how many students do take you up on that? Is it like one or two a class period? Like what's kind of the frequency to which they take you up on that offer?
Not that many, actually.
Okay.
A lot of the times it helps get them back in the door when they've started missing a lot of class, is that they go, oh, as soon as they feel like they don't have to participate, that they have that option, usually they don't take me up on it. But every so often, a couple times a semester, I'll get it.
Very nice. One of the things that I always love about these is that I come away from this so inspired. I mean, the empathetic and inclusive practices that people are sharing with, the student focus and all of your teaching philosophies and approaches, it's awesome. And, coming from a day when I didn't have a great day in the class, this is the kind of stuff that kind of heartens me to go back in and do my job the best I can. So I absolutely love that. At this point, and I apologize for this, I'm going to turn the conversation over to Noah. He's got some activities and things like that kind of planned. I have to go to a Council of Faculty Senate Presidents meeting. I would rather be here with you, but I'm going to go to that. Noah's going to take over. I'm going to be inspired by all of your words, and a couple of you are going to get shout outs in one of our videos coming up from this. So Andy, Beth, be watching for that. But it was so nice to spend some time with you today. And Noah, it's on you.
All right. Well, if anyone has any more thoughts on kind of things to do when you're having an off day, we can certainly continue that conversation. But before this, I was talking to Dawn about kind of checking in with how everyone's doing at that mid-semester point, kind of saying, are you checking in with your students at this point? If you're kind of soliciting any informal or formal mid-semester feedback from students and kind of just recommendations, how things are going. So I'd love to just kind of open it up, hear your thoughts on that.
I'd love to hear from other people on attendance. I feel like this semester I've seen a lot of students kind of falling off more than normal than what I expect with attendance. And it's something that I find challenging because I want to be empathetic and have I want to allow for students to have flexibility to take time if they need it. But at the same time, my classes are very dependent on discussion and engagement. And a small part of what they do is the preparation. And then a lot of it is like we do application in class. And so when they're not there, they're missing a lot of it. And I don't know. I'm like, what can I do to encourage aside from, like I said, I already tell them that they can come as an observer. I'm like, I don't know what else to do. And like, to what point should I worry about it? Like you talk to the students and some students just aren't going to come and you go like, well, what are you going to do? But I don't know. I'm curious if other people are having attendance issues and what they do about it in their classes.
I will talk. I don't know that I'm having issues so much because I do require attendance. However, because I have a large class, I do it through random quizzes. So some days I have 2 quizzes in a week. Sometimes it's 1. Sometimes I just forget altogether and they don't have one that week. I find it annoying, but that's okay. The point is to get them to come to class. However, I offer up to 5 makeup assignments for an unexcused absence. So if they miss an attendance quiz and they don't have documentation, and you know, my syllabus reads like an Apple iTunes agreement, but it's just the nature of having super large classes. So they can make up to 5 of those missed attendance quizzes. So that's not even how many classes they've missed, that's how many quizzes they've missed. So that seems to take pressure off of them. And then I also will, my live lectures match more or less what I give in my online class. So for the first couple of unexcused absences, I will actually even send them a video to replace what they missed in class that day. After about the third unexcused absence, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be sending videos anymore, but you can do the makeup assignment. It does involve some tracking, just because I have so many students, but it also, I don't know, it makes the student feel like they're known, because you can look and be like, oh, well, I've seen you miss 3 classes. So, you know, what's going on, kind of thing. And anyway, that's what I do. But I have 250-ish this semester. And then in the spring of this class, it's like 350-ish.
I've noticed too that in a couple of my classes, I have very reduced attendance right now. One of them is a flipped class. So the actual class session is really where students can come for help. And I've noticed that some of the students that are the most in need of that help are the ones that aren't coming. And I don't know how to convince them that they should really come. Every time I get an email from one saying, I just don't understand this, I'm like, well, you have 6 hours of tutoring every week that you could have if you would just show up. The other one's a senior level project design course. And I have a number of teams where there's 1 or 2 members that just don't come to the class session at all. And that's really time when they're supposed to be working with their teams. And some of them are doing that remotely, but it's very hard to tell sometimes how engaged they really are, which is frustrating, because that class traditionally is always, everybody has shown up and worked hard, and I'm not seeing that as much as this semester.
Hi, Andy, I think your class is a little bit small. It's probably about similar size from what I think I've inferred from multiple conversations. So it's not large like Kathleen has, but I offer a Zoom in to class in lieu of coming to class, as long as they email me within a certain amount of time before class starts. So like they can't wait till 5 minutes, you know, like right before class. But I ask that they email me. I try to do within an hour. I've been a little more flexible with some of that, because sometimes, you know, like it hits them in midday or whatever. And all they have to do is just say, hey, like I really would like to Zoom in today. They don't have to tell me why or anything. And then I set up an iPad at one of the tables as my Zoom in. So my Zoom isn't through like my computer and I don't have like all that functionality in my room to where like, you know, it's all connected. But I set it up at one of the tables, and then they are like a table member at that table the whole time. And so when they have table discussions, they turn the iPad so that they can talk to each other, and they can put their in the chat, or they can, you know, unmute and talk. And then when it's back to me, then they flip the iPad back around and they watch that. And so, and then if I know like that we're gonna do something in class where they might need to record something or do something different, I will have like a virtual version of that. So if they're doing like one day I had several people out, and so they were their own group, you know, instead of being a table group, right? And so then they got to do theirs in a slide versus on a poster chart or something like that. So I have found that it's an alternative, right? Again, most of the time their cameras are off, but they're at least there. And so they've made the effort to at least be up and on, you know, Zoom instead of just missing completely altogether. So that is something that I've been doing, but I am seeing a lot of attendance issues right now.
For those like who are having attendance issues, is there, I realize this is probably a lot more manageable in smaller classes, but if you're noticing the same students that are missing class 1, 2, 3 times, are you reaching out to them individually, kind of checking in, making sure everything's okay? Are you kind of leaving it more on them to kind of come to you with questions or things? Any strategies there that have worked and kind of encouraging students to come back to class?
I reach out to mine. Typically, I'll just say, hey, we missed you in class today. Hope everything's hope everything's okay. And then if it's kind of a pattern, if it's been several times, I might say something like, hey, you've got some work. I'll try to personalize it as I know. I'm not asking them to they don't have to give me their stories. Sometimes they do. But then I also have the non-responders. And I just continue to reach out so that I have that at least as a document, that way. And then after so many of those kind of times and not hearing back from them, that's when I reach out as a student and fill out student of concern forms. And then I'm able to say I've emailed them on I can give the dates, no response, just want to make sure, things are okay. And they'll work with that, or they'll, do a well check or things like that. So, but then, I still have those students, but yeah, I do try to reach out at least.
I feel like that's like one of the more disheartening parts of teaching, is that you can do all your best to try to infuse empathy into your design and into your interactions and put so much effort into trying to encourage your students to come to class. But at the end of the day, it really is ultimately up to them. I love all of the things that you're doing to reach out to them and personalize your interactions with them. Has anyone done any informal or formal mid-semester check-ins? If so, how have they gone? Have you gotten good feedback? Your courses kind of playing out the way that you had hoped them to? Kind of curious to hear everyone's experiences, thoughts on that.
So one of the things that I did when I was teaching at ESU, typically about at the mid-semester point, is that I would create a discussion on Canvas where that was worth just 5 extra credit points to incentivize them to do it. But it was just very simple. Post a GIF or post 2 GIFs on that discussion board, one of how you are currently feeling and one of how you would like to be feeling at the end of the semester. And usually the responses are pretty similar, kind of how Dawn did this morning, how a lot of us said we were tired and exhausted. A lot of those responses reflect that. So that helps students understand that they are not alone in those feelings of tired and exhaustion. And that can even be a good opportunity for the instructor as well to be like, I'm right there with you guys. We'll power through, we'll get through it. We're in this together, and just kind of being that extra support system to let them know that they are not alone in their struggles that they are going through.
Ted, you said that you offer extra credit for that, right? Okay,
Yeah.
and then I see that Beth also does a survey. Do people generally offer extra credit for this, or are there points assigned, or is it just out of the...
Typically when I do, I don't assign a whole lot of extra credit just because it is kind of one of those more lighthearted things, but it can help incentivize them to do that, even if it is very minimal.
So I've done the mid-course survey each time, but just this semester was the first time I offered extra credit for it. I only offered 1 point of extra credit though for it. And all they had to do was take a screenshot of the final submission page that says, thank you for completing this. And they posted it. And so then they got to apply that point on any assignment across the semester up till the final week. So they kind of can pick and choose. But one of the things, so I do the survey and I actually got the idea for doing it out of the course for, it's the ACUE course, Inclusive Teaching for Equitable Learning. And some people were talking about that. And so the key though, is that you actually do something with the feedback from the survey. And that's the thing that I get the most from my students is they will email me back and go, oh my gosh, I've never had an instructor take the feedback and do something with it. Like I've just given it, you know, and like, I feel like it just kind of falls on deaf ears. And so I take my feedback and I like reflect on it and I analyze it like I would qualitative data. I theme it, I code it, you know, I look at how many times this came up, and then I figure out how I'm going to respond to it. And this semester, I actually made a video walking through all of that. So like I gave each question, I showed the themes that came up, and then I told them that I was going to more specifically respond to some of these comments or these themes after I went through each of the questions. And then I either gave clarification for why something is the way it is in class, or said, I hear you, and so here's how I'm going to modify, adjust, alter, you know, whatever it might be. And again, they come back with, oh my gosh, like I've never had anybody look at, you know, data and do something with it. So I think it's kind of that, like, we give feedback to students, we want to you know, we're asking for their feedback, but what are we going to really do with it? And if you're not going to do anything with it, then don't ask for it.
I know
So
Don.
that's my 2 cents.
I know Don often asks, like, what's one thing about the class that we can change? And then what's one thing about the class that we can't change that you don't like? So I think that that's a really good opportunity for students to voice things that and make that distinction.
So my survey has one Likert scale. The first question is a Likert scale, 1 to 5. Rate your learning in this course so far. Like, how would you rate your learning experience so far? And then there's 3 open response questions. What's been the most beneficial to your learning experience in this course? What has caused you the most, what's been the most challenging with your learning experience in this course? And what suggestions might you give to enhance the learning in this course? So those are the 3 questions. And often the suggestions deal with like the challenge, right, that they have just discussed. So
actually, I have a follow-up question to that. So I guess, how do you balance like having them an anonymous like survey? Is this anonymous? And like
yes,
sometimes that's what I'm trying to maneuver, is disclosing their name, and can they be fully honest with their feedback? So I'm curious.
So I do it anonymously, and I do it through a Google form. So I don't use Canvas, even though I know you can do like an ungraded and you can do something anonymous that way. I haven't figured that out the best yet. And I feel like Google form, because I can put it into a spreadsheet so quickly, I can do the analysis work a whole lot easier that way than like through Canvas. And maybe there's an easy way to do that through Canvas, but I'm not there yet. So I do it through Google Forms. I just give them the link in Canvas, and I tell them it's optional. They do not have to take this survey. And then if they do, and they would like to use it for extra credit, again, this semester I offered 1 point, which 1 point in the grand scheme of things isn't just a ton in my class, but it's something. And it's not something that I've done before, but I was already getting the feedback, whether it's nonverbal, whether it's from our Zoom meetings that we have optionally each week, their comments and things, that like they are overwhelmed, and it is just crazy for them right now. And so I just felt like this would be just one little added incentive for them to do it. And ultimately there were only like 3 or 4 things that I really had to address. Some of them just openly said this is completely me and my problem, and time management was a huge thing. So this course that I teach is for the MAT course, the MAT program. So it's teachers, it's people who have a degree and they're coming back for initial licensure in teaching, and they get their master's along with it. But we also have a large portion of those who are in our new innovative residency program, which means they are first-year teachers and doing the master's program and trying to do all the things that comes along with teaching and all of that. So there was a very high high overwhelmment scale at the point of the survey. And many of them talked about how they just needed a break. Like there was just too much. And so because I got that so much, I thought, I'm just going to give them a break. And so I gave them this week off. So week 9 was like Dr. Pesnell's course fall break. And they don't have anything for me this week. I just moved stuff down. I'm gonna compact some things, you know, and put it together later. But I just felt like it would be better to let them rest and have this week off than to try to keep pushing through and have more and more fall behind or, you know, be disgruntled or whatever it is. And ultimately, like, it's probably going to be one of the best moves that I've made because they're getting this time off. They're going to be able to focus on what they need to, or another class that they're feeling over, you know, whatever it is. But that was a decision that I made because I heard it so much in the, you know, in the survey. But it was little things like, I wish you would release like more than one module at a time, you know, I just can't manage my time. You know, little things like that, the deadline, you know, like blah, blah, it was just, you know, and so I was able to either clarify or say, you know what, like, okay, I can release 2 modules, but here's what I'm concerned about. You know, like, I don't want to stress you out already. I don't want your work quality to decrease because you're worried about getting 2 modules done now at the same time. So, I was able to share my side of things, but also hear their side and tell them that I'm willing to try it or to do whatever it might be. So
I actually do both. I have anonymous and non-anonymous information that I get back from my students because I usually do a mid-semester survey like Beth was saying. And I do it in class. I give them like the last 5 to 10 minutes of class. I say, okay, here's the survey. I put a little QR code up on the screen, or I link it through Canvas so they have options and they go and they fill it out and give feedback that's totally anonymous. I'm like, tell me what you think. And, you know, if there's changes that need to be made, I'll make them. But then I also have students do self-reflections at the end of each unit. And so that gives me some information about, like, you know, it'll say like, okay, how do you think you did? What work are you most proud of? What are things that you think you can improve on? What are your goals for the next unit? And then I have just a little spot that's like, what else do you want me to know? And that's been a great way to kind of get that specific, like recognizing when there's a specific student that's having a hard time. And they also just give me general feedback in there. Like some students will be like, I don't like getting randomly assigned groups for you know, this one assignment that we have to do. Like, I'd rather we pick our own partners. And I'm like, okay, we'll pick our own partners next time. And they're always kind of like, oh, like Beth was saying, when you actually do something with that feedback, they're like, oh, really? Like, oh, okay. And then they speak up more throughout the semester. And sometimes I'm like, oh, that's not something we can do because of X, Y, or Z. Like, but just having that open communication can be really helpful. So I like having anonymous and then like personalized feedback in that way.
Oh, I can ask it in person too. Sorry. Hi, my name is Esther or Joanna. I'm a first year doc student and doing a GTA for the first time and teaching asynchronously. And I just was curious, just like for any of the DTAs here or anyone that wants to offer words of wisdom to us. I think on top of teaching asynchronously is, I guess, more than a time management thing, I'm having trouble with just my pure energy. Like classes are getting harder for us, researchers, like, you know, my major is trying to like, no, let's go for a published paper your first year. So it's a lot. And the teaching is like what I eventually want to do and love to do. And I've been starting to meet with some of my students after the mid-semester like check-in, like helping them catch up in the class, and some of them hardly like participated in class, right? So being in a space to hear their concerns and also trying to, you know, maintain my energy and being able to invest in my commitments too. So I think that's been a challenge. So any words of wisdom, I'd really appreciate.
I love that question, and it's one that I struggle with as well, but I'm getting better. And I think one thing that helps me, especially with supporting students, is making sure that I'm reflecting on the level of responsibility I'm taking, that I'm taking responsibility for my part and not the student's part. So there's responsibility on both sides, but I tend to take more responsibility than I should. Sometimes it's over my thinking outside of it, thinking, okay, what can I feel good about doing and do that much? And then telling a student, even just having this phrase, I really wish I could fill in the blank, but I'm not able to. Let me connect you with somebody who can help you more. I like with students in this class, and they say, what can I do? I'll say, I wish I had time to sit down with you and talk to you for an hour so that you did the same thing, but I just can't. So even voicing to them that I want to makes me feel better. And I think it also helps them to recognize I'm asking too much of my instructor here, because you know, without actually coming out saying you're asking something, you should just say, I wish I could, but I can't, I don't have time. The other thing that I think can help, that helps me a lot, is when I'm planning the class, I tend to think this has to be the best class ever. I have to do everything amazing. And instead telling myself, you know what, it's okay if once in a while the class is, you know, class was fine today. And usually what ends up happening on the days that I think going into class is maybe you do the class is just okay. Everything works out better than I think. And I told myself, okay, I don't need to make it the best class ever unless I have a really terrible class. If I leave a class and go, that was awful, I don't know what happened, it was a mess, next time I might prioritize that. That has yet to happen. So I certainly have some classes that are okay and some that are good and some that are great, but reminding myself that how often do I actually have a class that is just bad? It just really doesn't happen. So that's when I might pour extra time and energy into it. Is okay, I don't want 2 bad classes in a row, but I haven't had one. So it's okay if sometimes class is just class.
That's a great point, Melissa. I think and Joanne, this is something I've also often struggled with as a grad student, and I know everyone here as a grad student has probably struggled with the same thing, and that doesn't necessarily end in graduate school. But one thing I try to be intentional about is doing at least like kind of one fulfilling thing personally every single day. And I know it's kind of cliche, but you have to be intentional about kind of scheduling some time for yourself every day. And I know Ash and I spent a lot of time recently talking about this, like Parkinson's law, that things will take as much time as you give it. So I know if I go home at night and I give myself 3 hours to work on class stuff and to do readings and to grade, I will take all 3 hours. I can go beyond that. But truthfully, I'm kind of being intentional with finding some time to prioritize your well-being, because ultimately, you know, we can't attend to our students' needs if we're not taking care of our own. So at least every day checking in with yourself and doing something fulfilling is, at least for me, has been helpful. And I'm not always good about it, but I've gotten much better about it every semester in grad school.
Appreciate it all. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to drop one video in the chat. It's a previous video from Don's Engage Stage channel, things to do mid-semester. A lot of you seem that you're already doing these things. But if you want any kind of other recommendations on ways to check in with your students and yourself during this time, this might be a helpful resource. We want to give you some time to kind of get to your next meeting that starts at 1. But thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. I also always find these inspiring, and I'm so lucky to be with amazing people like you at K-State. Next week, we have Trevor Bell, graduate student in the Department of Psychological Sciences, talking about inclusive teachings. So a marginalized student walks in your classroom. We look forward to seeing Trevor talk. We'll stick around for a couple minutes after if anyone has questions, but thank you so much for sharing some time today, and have a good rest of your week.
I do have a question.